right? So for you, it was having these other experiences working in other populations, doing different degrees of service and provision that kind of led you and created the skill set needed and the expectation for then shifting into having someone come into your home for service, right? Let's talk about first how that interaction, the experience played out and the very first time someone came into your home, and then talk a little bit about how it affects you, your personal life, and either the challenges or, the wins that come with that, because you have someone that's, as a quote unquote client, I don't really like that word, but you have somebody who is not immediate family that you are, in part responsible for now in your living situation rather than in an office or in a group home. Talk a little bit more about that experience in and of itself.
So it's good you don't like the word clients because it sounds like they're living in my home for monetary reasons. But the terminology is member. We refer to them as members in Omaha. So whenever someone comes into my home, it's kind of a difficult experience for them and a difficult experience for myself, because even if you read their plan, their person-centered planning, you don't get to know the individual until you start living with the individual. And also in my book, I mentioned this in my book, there's what you call the honeymoon phase. And the reason I describe it as a honeymoon phase is sometimes individuals come into your home, there's no behavior, it's perfect. And it's like the honeymoon where everything is lovely. There's love going on, love in the air. Everything is perfect. You start questioning yourself as a host and provider. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this individual. Why are all this in his charts? Why? I think probably someone who drew up this chart is lying about this individual. This individual is not aggressive. That is the honeymoon phase. And when the honeymoon phase can last between, let's say, 1 week to a month, when the honeymoon phase ends, that is when the real work begins. That's when you start seeing an individual showing their maybe verbal aggression or physical aggression. They start acting out because now they are trying to know the environment. They're trying to test your limits. If you actually want them in your home, if you are actually caring. Because I've had individuals tell me, "Oh, I'm only in your home for the money. I'm going to move somewhere else anyway," and whatnot. So I'm like, that is not really the case. The reason you're here, my job here is for you to be better, for you to live as a human being, live like myself, enjoy what I do enjoy, going out, having relationships, and enjoying what you like doing. So whenever an individual moves into my home, I see sadness. Like the last person who moved into my home was crying. So what I did is, it just occurred to me. I was like, "Hey, let's go for a drive." I remember that day I drove for 6 hours. Yes, I drove for 6 hours just driving around, looking at structures. But by the time I finished driving and I got home, the individual was like, "Oh, this is a nice city, and where are we going tomorrow?" So that's the way I've kind of learned how to develop planning or an intuition to relieve what I would call sadness, because I don't want an individual feeling sad in my home. I know individuals are homesick. I know they're in a new environment. So personally, I know what to expect. And my job is to make them happy and make them whole. So it's kind of difficult. I know, sorry I'm rambling on and on, but I've had, it's like an intuition on how do I make someone happy. For instance, I see personally driving the individuals work for me because I like driving. For instance, when I wanted to break the news of one of my members' death of his father to him, we drove like for 2 hours before I told him, "Hey, your dad has passed on." It was like, "Tim, stop joking. You're always cracking jokes." I'm like, "No, really, your dad has passed on." It's like, what would we do? And I'm like, "We're gonna drive home." So in that period, driving is kind of like a relief. A relief. When we do the long drives, we get to listen to music and talk to each other.
You are having to adapt on your feet, but
Yes.
also right, and but also kind of be able to read the situation, read the room per se, the emotions, the feelings, the expectations almost of the persons coming into your home, and then base your initial interactions off of that in order to open up the space to create respect and a relationship. Is that kind of how you have to? Would that be a good way of describing it?
Absolutely. You just mentioned the characteristics of a host home provider. If you can't read the emotions of the member, you can't like dissect what the member is about to do or what's going on. Why is the member feeling sad? Then you're not ready to be a host home provider because you don't have the setting characteristics. You have to be able to read the room and read the individual. Yes, absolutely. You're correct.
This is a little bit of a side tantrum, but I'm curious. You've been through an extensive amount of training. They made sure you had the skill set. You obviously have the experience. When I think of foster families, right? I don't know much about that process, but from what I do know, I don't imagine that there's that much extensive research and follow-up and procedural steps taken to make sure that foster families have the same skills that like you yourself have to, even if it's temporarily host a child and care for them. Like, why? I don't know. Maybe the question is, why is that not such a priority in that system? And I know it's separate from yours and it's a different expectation of care. But if we're capable of having organizations such as the one that you work for that are training, assessing, and bringing in people to provide care either in home or not, then I feel like there's room to grow here as far as the way we prepare people to provide direct care, including foster parents or anyone who isn't like waking up to be a human services professional every day. But I'm seeing a gap here in the way
Yeah.
that we prepare people for one-on-one care.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned that because I'm also a foster parent myself. I'm a foster. Other than providing a host home to individual with developmental disability, I also provide uh, foster care. But here's why my experience the kind of individual developmental disabilities and the foster care I provide kind of mixed because the individual I provide foster care for has an intellectual disability. So that's how the host home providers they can also merge foster care into host home. But it's good what you said. I think foster parents need those kind of extensive trainings as well than we go through as host home provider. I think so.
Appreciate that. Thanks for that side tangent, because there are other areas in this field where we're trusting individuals to care, because that's what we do, provide service. But it's not, if you're expected as a person in your professional position to be responsible for another human being, I just wonder why the expectation isn't kind of in every sector of the field. But that might be a different conversation for a different day. I want to know more about how it has impacted your personal life. So you're having someone living in your environment, you have the skill set.
Mhm.
I think many viewers might be wondering, what impact has it had on your life? Because if they've never done this before, never heard about it before, maybe their imagination goes straight to, it's chaotic, it's unpredictable, it's how does it impact family and friends and lifestyle? Because I imagine that there are still boundaries that have to be set between for example, you might need to stop and take a bubble bath and enjoy yourself for the day and just have some peace and quiet to re-energize. And then the interpersonal reactions that you're having with other people, whether it's a happy day or you're cooking or you're going out to the grocery store. Talk about that a little bit, that experience for you as an individual.
So the experience is something that can be taught in school, and it's something our trainers can train us to do. You as an individual have to come up with a plan to create that boundary and have your own life. Personally, being a hosting provider would change. For me personally, it's a lifestyle. It's not a lifestyle anybody can, you can't just place an individual in your home. It's a lifestyle meant for the strong-hearted. I say strong-hearted because of the behaviors that some individuals with intellectual disability bring with them. But it will change your life in terms of you have to plan your life around this individual. You have to put everything personally aside, and this individual's life essentially becomes your life. You're living this individual's life. You're taking them to their medical appointment. But it's not all that bad. It's not that bad. It's not as crazy and chaotic as it sounds, because there's what you call respite. So respite is, for instance, you want to go on a holiday. You want to go on a month holiday or 2 weeks holiday. The agency can provide you respite. So an individual who is trained to deal with individuals with intellectual developmental disability can come into your home while you're away, or that individual can be placed in their home while you're away. So you get to take breaks from providing care.
Is the input of the individual who is receiving care taken into consideration in that regard? Because I do think, and I imagine in a situation like that where maybe someone doesn't want you to go on holiday or they're not comfortable with, again, being introduced to another individual. So how is that concern addressed, if it at all?
Most times the individual, if you have for example, you just have to have a good rapport with the individual you work with. If you can tell them, hey, I'm going on holiday, they go like, oh, when are you coming back? I'm going to miss you. Buy us something when you're coming back. And you just explain to them, you'll be living with this person. I'm going to be away for this period of time. The individual would understand. It's all about understanding and making them understand this is temporary, that they're coming back into your own home or you're coming back to the home.
So yeah, it's obviously their input is essential into making their decisions.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. As we kind of round out this conversation, there are two things I'm still very curious about. One of them being how you see the field of human services, in particular this role, but also just the approach to one-on-one care, where you see the future going in our field. If it needs to be revisited, reconstructed, resorted, taken down and a new procedures and such put in place. And then also, what about you as a person, not just your profession, but as a person? Do you find fulfilling in the help that you're providing, right? You said it's a lifestyle, which makes sense. Just because you're a human services professional does not make you right for every potential, position that lies under this umbrella. But, what do you feel inside of you when you're able to fulfill the needs and services, doing your job as a person, not as a professional, right? I can already tell that you aren't basing, your success off a bulleted list of what makes a professional successful, but as, human to human, like, what are you getting out of this? And then what do you see the future of this type of service being?
I feel, for me personally, I feel a great deal of satisfaction in providing. I feel like I'm making a difference in the life of individuals with developmental disability because at this point in time in my career, in my life, I can live comfortably, and I would say I can live comfortably even without a job, and I'll still be able to live comfortably. So I'm not really doing it for the money. I'm not in it for the money anymore. My job is to make sure uh, to do good for people, and I just kind of stumbled across these individuals that they would fit into my mission of helping people, and also where I see this going. I think uh, being a one of the reason being a hosting provider, or in some states it's called shared living provider, is not known is because they've not actually made it into like a career itself. And even a lot of hosting providers who provide this service don't even know what to refer to themselves as. They don't even know they are human service professionals, and it is a career. Yeah, I would say it's a. They don't know they are human service professional because this is a career in itself in helping people. And as human service professionals, I think we should have standards. There should be trainings in the future. There should be like conventions. We don't even have. I would like something like a host and provider convention where everybody comes across the United States to talk about difficulties, where we see the field going, just like what the National Organization of Human Services is doing, trying to bring everyone together. So that is my future for other hosting providers, being able to come together as professionals to discuss topics in relation to individuals with developmental disabilities.
I knew you'd say something that would inspire another question. So
Yeah.
one more, and that has to do with the network of providers. I was going to ask is, do you know other people who do the work you do? And if so, do you see a larger networking or connection or communication and degrees of support that happens? Or does that exist at all? Are you kind of on your own island until you see someone, going by in their own boat saying, I do the same thing?
I'm kind of on my own island in sense that if I don't see them in training, I don't even know they are host and providers. So what you just said, I'm on an island by myself, being a host and provider. I think from what I said previously is probably they don't see themselves as professionals because most host and providers have other jobs. Yes, because being a host and provider, it's an independent contract. For instance, where you're the individual you're caring for goes on to day service, because some of them go to day service from 8 to 4, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can go to do your other jobs. So I maybe those individuals put their other jobs as part of their profession and not being a host. But I would say this: a host and provider, it's a professional career on its own that should be given its merits because what we do, like I said in my book, I wouldn't say, I don't know about we, but I would say I am one of, if not the most important human service professional because what I do is very, very risky, rewarding, stressful, but it's also very fulfilling.
You're the quintessential example of human services. And I mean, not just that, like the actual field, what is human services? All right, well, look at Dr. Tim, like he's doing a bunch. And I think I want to just caveat a little bit what you said about people not perceiving themselves as human service professionals. Maybe that's just on us in the field to redefine what the word professional means. Because maybe it's too linguistically too much associated with stringent ideas of success, reaching certain, goals, making these hits where you aren't a professional or it's unprofessional to not do these things. But again, that's a language thing. I'm always fascinated when I meet people who have, from my perspective, they very much are constantly included in the human services field, but they would have never, ever considered it. Firefighters, I mean, as one, I had a very long conversation. He was like, I guess I get your point. I'm like, it is true. You might not be doing it, waking up every day, putting your boots on and saying, I'm a human services firefighter. But the importance of making that point is that if we continue to kind of restrict, I guess, our understanding of where our work, whatever it might be, and how it influences and crosses other fields of professionalism, we will accidentally or, inevitably just silo ourselves off. And we know that's kind of counterproductive in the field of human services. So before we chime off, I want you to talk a little bit about your book that you just published. Congratulations, by the way. You now have a book out there for the public to obtain and read.
Okay, thank you. The title of the book is The Host Home Provider in Human Services. And it actually details how to, it's kind of like a self-memoir and a self-helping book that shows people interested in becoming host home providers on the difficulties being a host home provider, what you would expect being a host home provider, and most importantly, how rewarding being a host home provider is. When I say rewarding, it is not like your daily 9 to 5. Money-wise, host home providers and what they earn ranges into 6 figures being a host home provider. And you don't have to do like I said, you don't have to do the 9 to 5. You have more time to spend with your family. You have more self-time. And to someone who is, it can appear boring to some people, but because of the nature of the job, it balances itself out because it's stressful and also rewarding. So it's kind of like I don't know how to describe it, stressful but rewarding. So my book details everything you need to know about, again, being a host home provider, the difficulties, the challenges, and how to deal with an individual placed in your home. One of the essential aspects of the book is boundaries. You have to maintain boundaries when an individual is placed in your home. Boundary is very, very, very extremely important. And also another aspect of the book is my approach in dealing with individuals with developmental disabilities. It details why I've been personally successful, and I think it's partly because of my legal background, my human rights background. I believe in human rights. So when an individual is placed in my home, part of the technique I use from human rights is to respect the individual, treat them with dignity, and afford them self-determination. By this, I allow an individual to be who they are. Sometimes I've even trained my individuals to make food for themselves, make dinner for themselves. Even if it's only when they mess up, I try to help. I help them. Let's say they mess up their dinner. I then show them how to make dinner. Little things like this make them appreciate life in general. And in respect to self-determination, I let individuals with intellectual and developmental disability exercise their rights. For instance, let's say your personal plan says you are not allowed a packet of cigarettes, and you get your hands on a packet of cigarettes. I'm not going to come towards you and grab the cigarettes from you and say, "Hey, do not smoke." You found the cigarettes. I will let you smoke the cigarette. Then I'll go through the normal measures of documentation and letting the agency know that, hey, A or B smoke cigarettes. I couldn't take the cigarettes away from them because they're allowed to do whatever they want to do in my home. If there are limitations, however, if what you're about to do poses risk to you as an individual or to other individuals, I have to intervene. But other than that, an individual is allowed to do whatever they want to do in my home.
You know what is really, really cool about what your work is? This popped into my head while you were talking about it. you mentioned the human rights approach to your work as a service provider. How do I word this perfectly? It's one thing, we are a field that is found at its foundation, human rights, respect, autonomy, and self-determination are like essential. Like we don't function without that assumption that that's what we're aiming for here. So that's the why this field exists. But what's really cool about your work is that you're showing how, right? Like, yes, advocates and policymakers and, insert job title here, their principles are based on those foundations, and your work is applied practice of those principles.
Absolutely.
Cool. I really love that because we can work, day in and day out, like we do in this field, passionate about protecting the autonomy and self-determination of individuals, right? And yet what you're doing is actually not asking in the sense that it's a requirement, but you're creating that space where you're saying, I valued the principle of your, autonomy. So here is the space and the opportunity to have it. Here are, the consequences or the strengths to it. And I'm not going to limit you because that's one, not why I'm doing it, but two, that's just not how the process works because the process is literally directly connected to those, the values of the whole field in itself. And that isn't to say any other type of service provider isn't working by the same nature. But what runs through my brain are all the academic papers and all of the scholars and researchers and situations and case studies wherein yes, it's obvious that the argument here is, here's what we're valuing. And yet there are millions of other ways that those values are, engaged with that don't actually include creating a space wherein that, that person receiving the service or being advocated for is therein asked to, actualize their autonomy, their own ability and responsibility of their free will. That's really cool. You're pretty cool, Tim.
Yeah. Also, let me just add, the way I thought about this approach is, when I've been doing this field, I don't know if you've heard about guardians. Guardians are people who sometimes make decisions, help individuals with developmental disabilities make decisions. And the reason I came with a human rights approach is I found a lot of guardians not understanding this field. Some guardians want you to be a caretaker in the sense that they want you to cook for these individuals. They want you to bathe these individuals. But as time has gone on, from my personal experience, I've seen the individuals I work with much more happier, reaching a level of self-actualization when they get to do little things by themselves. For example, I had a kid who I was taking care of scream when he wasn't able to go into a gas station to purchase a drink with the debit card I gave him. He was excited. He was like, whoa, I didn't know I could do that. That was the first time I was doing this. This little thing makes a huge difference, but a lot of guardians do not understand this. They see it as you not doing your job properly when you're not one-on-one with the individual. But sometimes autonomy helps a great deal in creating a lively well-being for an individual with intellectual developmental disability.
Absolutely. Maybe that's one thing that we just still have not let go of from our past. And that is that power relationship wherein it's assumed that that person providing service sits above, or has a responsibility or should make the best decisions that have nothing to do with the needs, wants, drives, motivations of the person they're caring for. So that's a blemish in our field. We should definitely work on that because it might just go not ignored, but unseen because the assumption is I'm the professional. I have the skills and knowledge to help you. And now in some sense that word help has been expanded to I can decide for you. And that's gross. I don't like that idea. We should avoid that. Yeah. I'm also picturing your book, being that you this network of host home providers there's still potential for it to grow. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist and will never, but I can imagine your book being in courses and classes in the future that it really introduced this idea, because you're the first one to show up in this field. You know, you're the first person to migrate into this work and actually advocate for it, which is awesome. If you can advocate for clients, but also people in your position. Okay, I see you. That's amazing. Do you have anything else you want to share?
No, that's all. That's all for me.
Awesome. I'm excited. I'm excited to continue working with you within, NOSE itself, but also to learn from not just your work, because I can admit right now, this is not the position for me, but your philosophy of care is golden and it's refreshing as well. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences with us today.
One more thing before you go. And I've also found because of my nature of not being scared, not being scared in the sense that, okay, if you don't like the way I'm working with this individual with intellectual disability, you can take them and see how the other person works with. I've also found that the individuals I work with, they sense my stance, they sense I advocate for them. Sometimes you want to take them out of my home, they tell you, I'm not leaving. And even when they leave, they ask you, when am I going back to Tim's?
Yeah. So you're definitely, you're making those connections with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you're unafraid of it. It's definitely I think I really love that word that you use, lifestyle. You have to have a certain personality. I really don't, and I'm not saying it's impossible. I really just don't see a fresh out of college, 24-year-old who has a human service professional degree necessarily being ready for this kind of position, because experience is key. It's so key.
It's key.
And you got to be, I guess, thick-skinned. I don't want to, without any negative connotation on the word, you don't want to be heartless, of course, but you do have to have the understanding, those clear lines in your brain of what you're responsible for, but also just how to be empathetic and understanding and know when to say no. I think a lot of people outside of our field might think like that wouldn't be an issue, but it's an issue. It's right. It already takes a certain person to be in the human services. And then after that, it is a constant check-in with yourself. Are you where you need to be, and are you doing it the right way? Right. Yeah. So very cool. I appreciate you coming on and talking with us today. And I will have all the information for your book at the end of this episode, and people can check it out.
Okay. Thank you very much, Casey.
Special thanks to our guest, Dr. Tim. You can find his book, The Host Home Provider in Human Services, on Amazon or from Barnes & Noble. Be sure to listen to part 1 and all of our previous episodes on our YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcast, or Apple Podcast platforms.